I joked, "She's my wife." And she blushed and whispered, "I wish that were true." The music in the crowded restaurant faded to a dull hum as Arvid Florio's teasing voice cut through the air. "Oh, Rosina, don't worry about her." He chuckled, draping an arm casually over her rigid shoulder, addressing the persistent businessman. "She's my wife." It was a lie, a practiced defense mechanism. But as Arvid pulled away, he caught the flush staining Rosina Tossi's cheeks, a stark contrast to her usual icy composure. Then, barely audible over the clatter of silverware, she whispered words that shattered his world. "I wish that were true." Leclis, Milan's most ostentatiously modern fusion restaurant, was thick with the scent of truffle oil and desperate networking. Arvid Florio hated it. He hated the thumping bass line that masqueraded as background music. He hated the microscopic portions on oversized square plates. And most of all, he hated Augusto Marin. Augusto, a slick-haired venture capitalist with a reputation for predatory acquisitions and wandering hands, was currently cornering them near the illuminated ice sculpture. Arvid adjusted his tie, a subtle silk number that felt increasingly like a noose. Beside him stood Rosina Tossi, her posture so perfectly straight she might have been supported by a steel rod. Rosina was Arvid's business partner, his sharpest critic, and the closest thing he had to a best friend, though neither of them would ever use that term. They ran Florio Tossi Innovations, a mid-sized tech firm on the cusp of either a massive breakthrough or total bankruptcy, depending on how this week went. Augusto leaned in closer to Rosina, invading her personal space with an entitled smirk. "So, Rosina," Augusto purred, his eyes dropping briefly to her neckline before snapping back up. "You're the brains behind this new algorithm, yes? Perhaps we could discuss it further over drinks. Just the two of us. Arvid here looks like he needs a break." Rosina's jaw tightened. She hated Augusto even more than Arvid did. She was a brilliant coder, a woman who spoke in logic and executed with precision. Small talk was her enemy. Flirtation from aggressive investors was her nightmare. She shot Arvid a subtle, desperate glance and a tiny widening of her dark, expressive eyes that he had learned to translate flawlessly over 5 years of partnership. "Get me out of this." Arvid stepped smoothly into the gap between them. He possessed a natural, easy charm that Rosina lacked, a weapon he frequently deployed to protect her. "Actually, Augusto," Arvid said, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads, his tone laced with false joviality. He draped a heavy arm over Rosina's shoulder, pulling her firmly against his side. She stiffened, a reflex, but didn't pull away. "Don't worry about her schedule. She's my wife." It was a blatant lie, a joke they'd used once before, years ago, at a dreadful tech conference in Berlin, to ward off a particularly persistent rival. Augusto blinked, his predatory smile faltering. "Wife? I had no idea. You two never mentioned... We prefer to keep our personal and professional lives somewhat distinct," Arvid lied effortlessly, giving Rosina's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "But yes, happily married. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a meeting with the Meunier Group in 10 minutes. Augusto retreated, muttering apologies, his interest visibly deflated by the not available sign Arvid had just slapped on her. Arvid exhaled a long breath, dropping his arm and stepping back. "Sorry about that," he muttered, turning to her. "Desperate times." He expected a dry remark, a scolding for his lack of professionalism, or perhaps a simple, curt nod of thanks. What he got instead froze the blood in his veins. Rosina was staring at the floor. The icy composure that was her trademark had vanished. A furious blush starting from her neck and sweeping up to her cheekbones painted her skin a vibrant, undeniable red. She looked vulnerable, exposed in a way Arvid had never seen in half a decade. "Rosina," he asked, his voice suddenly rough. "Are you all right?" She didn't look up. Her hands, usually still and purposeful, fluttered nervously near her clutch. Then she spoke. It wasn't her usual crisp, authoritative tone. It was a whisper, fragile and devastatingly soft, barely carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "I wish that were true." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the oppressive atmosphere of Leclis. Arvid stared at her, his mind struggling to process the impossible. Rosina Tossi, the woman who lived for data, who treated emotions as inefficient variables, had just confessed. What? A crush? Love? Before he could articulate a single syllable, before he could demand an explanation or offer comfort, the sharp voice of Katharina Salinas cut through the tension. "There you two are!" Katharina, their lead designer and a woman who communicated entirely in exclamation points, bounded up to them. "Node Mounier is waiting in the private room. He looks impatient. And Arvid, your tie is crooked. Let's go!" Rosina snapped her head up, the blush fading as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by a mask of professional stoicism. "Right," she said, her voice completely steady, as if the last 10 seconds hadn't happened. "Let's not keep Mr. Mounier waiting." She marched past him, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. Arvid stood rooted to the spot for a moment, the ghost of her words echoing in his ears. "I wish that were true." He straightened his tie, feeling utterly unmoored, and followed her into the fray. The private dining room was heavily soundproofed, offering a stark, silent contrast to the chaos outside. Seated at the head of the mahogany table was Node Mounier, a titan of European venture capital. Naud was a man of few words and vast resources, known for his ruthless efficiency and a stare that could curdle milk. Beside him sat Jane Meyer, his sharp-eyed legal counsel, her fingers poised over a tablet. Arvid and Rosina took their seats opposite them. Usually they moved in perfect sync during these pitches. Arvid handled the vision, the grand narrative of how their software would revolutionize supply chain logistics. Rosina handled the reality, the complex algorithms and the cold, hard numbers that proved Arvid wasn't just spinning fairy tales. Today, the rhythm was off. "So," Nerd began, his voice a low rumble, "you seek 5 million, a significant sum for a company that has yet to turn a profit." Arvid launched into his pitch, projecting confidence he didn't feel. He spoke of market disruption, of predictive analytics, of their unique edge. But his peripheral vision kept snagging on Rosina. She was sitting stiffly, her eyes fixed on her laptop screen, her jaw tense. The air between them, usually humming with collaborative energy, felt fraught, electrified by her whispered confession. "The predictive models," Jane interrupted smoothly, tapping her stylus against her tablet. "They seem robust, in theory. But your beta testing data, it's limited. How can you guarantee scalability?" This was Rosina's cue. Normally, she would dismantle Jane's skepticism with a barrage of flawlessly presented data points. But she hesitated. The silence stretched for a beat too long. "Rosina," Arvid prompted softly, trying to mask his rising panic. She blinked, startled, as if pulled from a deep trance. She looked at Jane, then down at her screen. The beta data is preliminary, yes," she began, her voice lacking its usual commanding ring. "But the underlying architecture is designed for dynamic load balancing. She faltered again, losing her train of thought. Naud's gaze sharpened, narrowing on Rosina. He smelled blood in the water. "If the chief architect hesitates on scalability, Mr. Florio, why shouldn't I?" Arvid felt a cold sweat prickle at his hairline. This pitch was everything. They needed this capital to launch, or Florio Tosi Innovations was dead in the water. He needed to cover for her, but he couldn't answer the technical nuances with her precision. Suddenly, a voice spoke from the corner of the room. Zaharia Jarvis, their newly hired, fiercely ambitious junior developer, had been invited along to observe. He was young, brilliant, and hungry. "If I may, Mr. Mounier," Zaharia said, stepping forward. He didn't wait for permission. He launched into a rapid-fire, highly technical explanation of their load-balancing protocols, citing recent stress tests that Arvid wasn't even aware they'd completed. He was articulate, confident, and perhaps a little too eager to shine. Rosina stared at Zaharia, a complex emotion flickering across her face. Relief? Annoyance? Arvid couldn't tell, but Zaharia's intervention saved the moment. Jane nodded, satisfied, and Naud's expression softened slightly. "Impressive," Naud murmured, looking at Zaharia. "It's good to see depth in the team." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Zaharia took point on several more technical questions, while Rosina remained largely silent, nodding occasionally. When they finally emerged from the private room, the tension was suffocating. "We need to talk," Arvid said softly to Rosina, pulling her aside as Katharina and Zaharia celebrated the ostensibly successful meeting. "Not now, Arvid," Rosina snapped, her voice tight. I need to get back to the office. The servers need a manual reset. Rosina, what happened in there? You froze. She finally looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with a mix of anger and defensiveness. I didn't freeze. I had a momentary lapse in concentration. Zaharia handled it perfectly well. Zaharia shouldn't have to handle it. You're the partner. And what about before, in the restaurant? Her face closed off completely, a familiar fortress rising between them. I don't know what you're talking about, she said coldly. It was a stressful interaction with Augusto. I misspoke. Forget it. Before he could push further, Nixon Mitchell, a longtime rival of theirs from a competing firm, sauntered over. Nixon was polished, arrogant, and always seemed to know exactly where their weaknesses lay. Florio Tosi, Nixon drawled, his eyes darting between them. Saw you in with Munier. Looked tense. Having trouble keeping the troops in line, Arvid? He glanced pointedly at Zaharia, who was boasting to Katharina. Mind your own business, Nixon, Arvid warned, his patience gone. Just friendly observation, Nixon smirked. Rumour has it your algorithm has a critical flaw. Be a shame if Naud found out before the ink was dry. He walked away, leaving a toxic cloud in his wake. Arvid looked back at Rosina, but she was already walking toward the exit, her posture rigid, her secrets locked tightly away. The lie he had told to protect her had unravelled something profound, and Arvid feared he had no idea how to put it back together. The atmosphere in the Florio Tosi office the following Monday was thick enough to slice. The open-plan space, usually buzzing with the hum of servers and collaborative arguments, felt like a minefield. Arvid sat in his glass-walled office, staring blindly at a spreadsheet. He hadn't slept properly since Friday night. I wish that were true. The words played on a loop in his head. He had spent the weekend trying to analyse his own feelings. He loved Rosina. He realised that now. He loved her brilliant mind, her dry wit, the way she chewed on her thumbnail when she was compiling complex code. He loved her loyalty, but he had never allowed himself to cross that line, terrified of ruining the fragile, vital partnership they had built. He thought she felt the same. Now, the revelation that she harboured hidden desires had shattered his equilibrium. He needed to talk to her, to clear the air, to figure out what this meant for them, but she had been avoiding him. She came in early, left late, and communicated primarily through curt emails and Slack messages. He watched her through the glass. She was huddled with Zaharia at his desk. Zaharia was pointing eagerly at his screen, talking animatedly. Rosina was nodding, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. A sharp pang of something ugly and unfamiliar twisted in Arvid's gut. Jealousy. Katharina practically bounced into his office, breaking his bleak reverie. Naud's office called. They want a follow-up meeting on Wednesday. Just you, Rosina, and Naud. No lawyers, no junior devs. Arvid forced a smile. That's good news, Katharina. Means they're serious. It means we're close, Katharina squealed. We need to make sure the presentation is flawless. Rosina's been working with Zaharia all morning on the new data models. Right, Arvid said, his voice flat. I'll go talk to her. He stepped out of his office and walked toward them. As he approached, he heard Zaharia say, Naman. And if we implement this subroutine, it will increase processing speed by 12%. It's risky, but it's brilliant, Rosina. It is, Rosina agreed, her eyes alight with the thrill of the problem-solving he usually shared with her. Good work, Zaharia. Rosina, Arvid interrupted, trying to keep his tone neutral. We need to prep for Wednesday. Naud wants just the two of us. Rosina's smile vanished, replaced by the polite, distant mask she had worn all weekend. Of course, I'll send you the updated projections Zaharia and I have been working on. I don't want to see Zaharia's projections, Arvid said, a little too sharply. I want to see yours. You're the architect. Zaharia looked up, bristling slightly. With respect, Arvid, we're a team. I was just trying to help optimize. Your help is appreciated, Zaharia, Arvid cut him off. But this is a founder-level discussion. Rosina, my office, now. It was a mistake. He knew it the moment the words left his mouth. He had pulled rank, something they never did. Rosina's eyes narrowed, a dangerous spark igniting within them. She stood up slowly. Fine. She followed him into his office and closed the door with a quiet, ominous click. Before he could apologize, she spoke. What is your problem, Arvid? Zaharia is doing excellent work. Work I couldn't focus on because I was too busy being ambushed by your ridiculous wife comment on Friday. My problem? Arvid flared, the stress and lack of sleep finally cracking his control. My problem is that my partner froze during the most important pitch of our lives, and now she's hiding behind a junior developer instead of talking to me. I am not hiding, Rosina shot back, her voice rising. I am trying to keep this company afloat while you spin out over a stupid misunderstanding. Was it a misunderstanding, Rosina? Arvid demanded, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. Because it didn't sound like a misunderstanding. It sounded like a confession. She recoiled as if struck. The colour drained from her face, leaving her pale and shaken. I told you. I misspoke. I was stressed. Augusto was being foul. It meant nothing. You're lying, Arvid said softly, the anger draining away, leaving only a profound sadness. You're a terrible liar, Rosina. You always have been. She turned away, staring out the glass at the busy office floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was choked. And what if I am? What if I meant it? What does it change, Arvid? Nothing. We are partners. We are building something. We can't let this ruin it. It doesn't have to ruin it, Arvid pleaded, reaching out to touch her arm. She flinched away from his touch. Yes, it does. Because you don't feel the same way. You used it as a joke, a convenient shield. And now you're just feeling guilty. That's not true, he protested, the realization crystallizing in his mind. I never thought it was an option. I never wanted to risk us. Well, you risked it, she said bitterly. And now it's broken. We need to focus on Wednesday. If we don't get Nude's money, there won't be an us to worry about, professional or otherwise. She walked out of the office, leaving Arvid standing alone in the glass box. The fracture between them wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a chasm, and Arvid had no idea how to bridge it before Wednesday. Little did he know the situation was about to get much worse. Across the room, Lena Foliero, their quiet, observant office manager, was watching them carefully, a calculated glint in her eye. She had her own agenda, and the growing rift between the founders was the perfect opportunity to execute it. Lena Foliero was a ghost in the machinery of Florio Tosi Innovations. As the office manager, she possessed the keys to the kingdom. She managed the server access logs, handled the payroll, watered the drooping fiddle leaf figs, and knew everybody's passwords because they were foolishly written on sticky notes hidden beneath keyboards. She was 42, chronically overlooked, and fiercely resentful of the young, brilliant founders who treated her like a fixture rather than a person. On Tuesday evening, long after Arvid had locked himself in his glass office to brood, and Rosina had departed with a face like thunder, Lena sat in the dim glow of her dual monitors. The open-plan office was eerily silent, save for the hum of the massive cooling units keeping the server room chilled. With practiced efficiency, Lena accessed the restricted beta testing directory. It wasn't difficult. Zaharia, in his youthful arrogance, had left his terminal logged in earlier that afternoon while he went to grab an espresso. Lena had quickly transferred the encrypted files containing the dynamic load-balancing stress tests, the exact data Rosina had been agonizing over, onto a secure, untraceable flash drive. Now, sitting in the quiet, she attached a decrypted copy of the vulnerability report to a burner email account. The recipient was Nixon Mitchell. Nixon had approached her 3 months ago at a local coffee shop, his smile oily and his promises grandiose. He hadn't asked for much at first, just an overview of their client roster. But as Florio Tosi edged closer to the Munier deal, Nixon's demands had escalated, matched only by the size of the deposits appearing in Lena's offshore account. He had promised her a title, Director of Operations, and a corner office at his firm the moment Arvid and Rosina's company folded. Watching the founders tear each other apart earlier that day had been the perfect smokescreen. They were so blinded by their own interpersonal drama that they had stopped watching the perimeter. Lena hit send, watching the progress bar fill, sealing the fate of the company. Miles away, in his starkly minimalist apartment overlooking the Navigli canals, Arvid Florio was pouring his third glass of whiskey. The amber liquid burned his throat, a welcome distraction from the agonizing loop of memories playing in his mind. I wish that were true. He walked over to his bookshelf, his fingers trailing over the spines until they stopped on a dog-eared copy of a textbook on artificial neural networks. Rosina had left it there 3 years ago. His apartment was subtly littered with the ghosts of her presence, a specific brand of chamomile tea in the pantry she demanded during late-night coding sessions, a spare umbrella she'd forgotten by the door, the indentation on the right side of his leather sofa where she always sat when they brainstormed. Arvid collapsed onto that exact spot, burying his face in his hands. He had been a fool. The wife joke hadn't just been a defense mechanism, it had been a subconscious manifestation of his deepest, most guarded desire. He had loved Rosina Tosi for years. He loved the fierce, uncompromising way she viewed the world. He loved how she could dismantle a complex problem with surgical precision. But he had built walls around that love, convincing himself that a romantic entanglement would destroy the fragile brilliance of their partnership. He had chosen the company over his heart. And now, in a cruel twist of irony, he was about to lose both. Wednesday morning arrived with a torrential downpour, the sky over Milan the colour of bruised iron. The drive to the Munier Group headquarters was an exercise in pure, unadulterated torture. Arvid and Rosina sat in the back of an executive black car, the heavy silence between them broken only by the rhythmic, aggressive slashing of the windshield wipers. Rosina was armoured for battle. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that left absolutely no room for vulnerability. Her dark hair pulled back into a severe, immovable knot at the nape of her neck. She stared out the window, refusing to acknowledge his presence. "Rosina," Arvid tried, his voice barely a rasp. "We have to be a united front today. Whatever is happening between us, we have to box it up for the next 2 hours. Please." She slowly turned her head, her dark eyes devoid of the warmth he usually found there. "My personal feelings are entirely boxed up, Arvid. I'm focused solely on the survival of our algorithm. I suggest you do the same and let me do the talking when the technical questions arise. No more overriding me." Arvid swallowed hard, the sting of her rebuke sharp. "Understood." As the car pulled up to the towering, imposing glass structure of the Munier Group, Arvid felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting for them upstairs. He reached for the door handle, bracing himself for the fight of his life, entirely unaware that the battle had already been lost. The top floor of the Munier building was a monument to wealth and intimidation. The walls were clad in dark walnut, the floors a seamless expanse of polished black marble that reflected their tense, walking figures like ghosts. A silent, unsmiling assistant led them into a boardroom that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the rain-lashed city below, but Arvid's attention was entirely on the man sitting at the far end of the sprawling glass table. Naud Munier did not stand when they entered. He sat with his hands steepled, his face carved from granite. Beside him, Jane Meyer, the legal counsel, was already typing rapidly on her tablet, not bothering to look up. "Mr. Florio, Miss Tosi, take a seat," Naud commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the heavy table. Arvid and Rosina sat, opening their laptops. Arvid forced a confident smile, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Good morning, Naud. We've brought the updated projections you requested, specifically focusing on the Q3 scalability models." "Save it," Naud interrupted, his tone as sharp as a guillotine blade. Arvid blinked, his smile faltering. "Excuse me?" Naud pushed a sleek black folder across the expanse of the glass table. It slid with a soft hiss, stopping exactly halfway between them. "I don't need to see your projections, Mr. Florio, because I'm already looking at your reality. Open it." Rosina reached for the folder, her usually steady hands trembling just a fraction of a millimetre. Arvid watched her face as she flipped the cover open. For a terrifying second, her expression remained blank. Then, the blood completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her ashy and hollow. Her eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the data with horrifying speed. "Where did you get this?" Rosina whispered, her voice stripped of all its usual authority. "What is it?" Arvid demanded, leaning over to look. The pages were dense with code and statistical graphs. But even with his limited programming expertise, Arvid recognized the headers. It was the raw, unedited stress test data for their dynamic load-balancing subroutine, the exact data Zaharia had been running all weekend. Red lines slashed across the graphs indicating catastrophic server failure when user loads surpassed a critical threshold. It was the flaw Nixon Mitchell had hinted at. "I have a vast network, Ms. Tosi," Naud said coolly. leaning back in his leather chair. When I prepare to invest 5 million euros, I do not rely solely on the polished presentations of founders who hesitate during pitches. This was delivered to my office late last night by an anonymous source. An independent audit of the data confirms its authenticity. Your system collapses under enterprise-level strain. This is an incomplete build, Rosina fired back, her defensive instincts finally kicking in. Her voice rose, echoing sharply in the cavernous room. This is alpha stage stress testing on an isolated subroutine. We are already implementing a patch that rewrote the processing power. A patch? Jane Meyer spoke up for the first time, her eyes glinting with predatory delight. You are seeking enterprise capital for a system that requires a structural patch before it even launches? That is not market disruption, Miss Tosi. That is a liability. Every complex software requires iteration, Arvid interjected, desperate to regain control of the room, to shield Rosina from the onslaught. You know how tech development works, Naud. We find the breaking points so we can fortify them. This data just proves we are rigorously testing our own limits. Naud's gaze shifted to Arvid, heavy and unforgiving. What it proves, Mr. Florio, is that your partner knew about a critical vulnerability and attempted to conceal it during our initial meeting. It proves your junior developer had to lie to cover for her hesitation. It proves that there is a leak in your organization. If you cannot secure your own internal testing data, how can I trust you to secure my capital? The words hit Arvid like physical blows. A leak. Someone inside their company had betrayed them. His mind raced, frantically searching for suspects, and immediately landed on the most obvious target. Zaharia. The ambitious kid who had tried to play hero. Zaharia had access. Zaharia had run the tests. We will find the source of the leak and terminate them immediately, Arvid said, his voice dropping to a harsh, promised whisper. The vulnerability is fixable. Give us 48 hours, Naud. We will present the patched code, verified by a third party of your choosing. Naud stood up, signaling the abrupt end of the meeting. He looked down at them, his expression a mix of disappointment and cold finality. The venture capital world is built on trust as much as technology, Arvid. Your technology is flawed, and my trust in your team is gone. The offer is officially withdrawn. Naud, please. We are done here. Jane will see you out. Naud turned his back, walking toward the heavy oak doors at the rear of the boardroom, dismissing them entirely. Rosina slammed the folder shut. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. She didn't say a word. She stood up, shoved her laptop into her bag, and walked out of the room, leaving Arvid to scramble after her. The elevator ride down to the lobby was an abyss. Arvid looked at Rosina. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes glassy, her jaw locked so tight he feared her teeth might crack. The company they had bled for over 5 years was dying, and the chasm between them had never been wider. They hit the doors of Florio Tosi Innovations like a hurricane making landfall. The moment they stepped into the open plan office, the ambient chatter died instantly. The team, 20 talented engineers, designers and marketers, took one look at Arvid's pale, furious face and Rosina's devastated posture and knew immediately that the Meunier deal was dead. Arvid didn't pause. He marched straight across the room, his eyes locked on the corner desk where Zaharia Jarvis was happily typing away, wearing oversized headphones. Arvid reached out, grabbed the headphones and yanked them off Zaharia's ears. "Hey, what the hell?" Zaharia started, spinning around in his chair. "My office, now!" Arvid barked, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. Zaharia looked bewildered, his eyes darting to Rosina, who stood frozen by the entrance, unable to look away. Slowly, Zaharia stood and followed Arvid into the glass enclosure. Arvid slammed the door shut, hitting the button that lowered the privacy blinds, sealing them off from the terrified stares of the office. Lena Foliero, sitting at the reception desk, quietly picked up a stack of mail, hiding a thin, satisfied smile behind a courier envelope. "What is going on, Arvid?" Zaharia demanded, crossing his arms defensively. Arvid rounded on him, closing the distance until they were inches apart. "How much did Nixon Mitchell pay you, or did you just give it to Naud directly to make yourself look like the smartest guy in the room?" Zaharia's face scrunched in utter confusion. "Pay me? Naud? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me," Arvid shouted, slamming his hand onto his desk. "The stress test data on the load balancing subroutine, the data you and Rosina ran this weekend, Naud had a printed copy of it on his desk this morning. He pulled the funding because of a critical leak. It was your terminal, Zaharia. You had the files. Understanding dawned on Zaharia's face, followed rapidly by an explosive, indignant fury. Are you out of your mind? You think I leaked our own alpha data? I've been working 80-hour weeks trying to optimize that code for you. I covered for Rosina when she choked in the first meeting. You didn't cover for her, you staged a coup. Arvid spat, the jealousy and stress of the past week blinding his logic. You wanted to prove you were better than the chief architect. And when I shut you down on Monday, you got angry and decided to burn the whole thing down. You are insane, Zaharia said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. He stepped back, shaking his head in disgust. I am a developer, Arvid. My code is my reputation. I would never leak proprietary data. Someone hacked my terminal. Or maybe you should look closer to home. Everyone knows you and Rosina have been at each other's throats for days. Before Arvid could retaliate, the office door flew open. Rosina stood there, breathing heavily. She had bypassed the blinds, stepping into the volatile atmosphere of the room. "Stop it!" she commanded, her voice ragged. "Just stop!" "Rosina, he leaked the files," Arvid started. "He didn't leak the files, Arvid," Rosina yelled, startling both men. "Zaharia is arrogant, but he isn't a corporate spy. His timestamp logs show he was offline during the transfer window. I checked them the second we walked in. It was an internal IP address, but someone spoofed his credentials." Arvid stared at her, the wind completely knocked out of his sails. "Then who?" "I don't know," Rosina said, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. "And right now it doesn't matter. The money is gone. The reputation is ruined. The company is bleeding out." Zaharia looked between the two founders, the disgust on his face morphing into pity. "You two are toxic. You're destroying your own company because you can't figure out how to communicate with each other. I quit." He didn't wait for a response. Zaharia pushed past Rosina, marched to his desk, grabbed his backpack, and walked out the front doors. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the glass office. Through the blinds, the shadows of their remaining employees moved nervously. Arvid sank into his chair, the adrenaline draining from his body, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing exhaustion. He looked up at Rosina. She was standing by the door, staring at the empty space where Zaharia had been. "Rosina," Arvid began softly, all the anger gone. "I'm so sorry, I panicked. I just wanted to protect you." Rosina let out a humorless, broken laugh. "Protect me? From what, Arvid? My own failing code? From Nud Mounier? From yourself?" She walked slowly toward his desk. The severe knot in her hair had loosened, strands falling around her pale face. She looked utterly defeated. The icy composure shattered permanently. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, the words echoing the fateful moment in the restaurant, but carrying a much darker weight. "Can't do what?" Arvid asked, dread pooling in his stomach. "The company. We can rebuild. We can find another investor. We'll trace the hack." "Us," Rosina interrupted. She looked directly into his eyes, and Arvid saw the tears brimming on her lower lashes, a sight that broke his heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "I can't do us anymore. You were right in your office on Monday. The wife joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I meant what I whispered. I have loved you for years, Arvid." Arvid stood up, his breath catching in his throat. "Rosina." She held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "No. Let me finish. I let my feelings for you compromise my judgment. I froze in that first meeting because my heart was breaking, not because of the code. I am the chief architect, and I let my personal emotions jeopardize the entire firm. And you lie to protect me. You lash out at employees to defend me. We are a liability to each other." "That's not true," Arvid pleaded, walking around the desk. "We are a team. I love you too, Rosina. I just didn't know how to say it without breaking what we had built." A single tear tracked down her cheek, but her voice grew firm. "Well, it's broken anyway. You need to save this company, Arvid. You are the visionary. You can't do that if you're constantly trying to save me too. And I cannot stay here, looking at you every day, knowing that our feelings for each other cost us our dream." She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her heavy silver keycard and placed it gently on his desk. It landed with a soft, final click. "I am officially stepping down as partner and chief architect, effective immediately," Rosina said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'll send the formal paperwork by morning." "Rosina, please don't do this. We can fix the code. We can fix us." She stepped back, moving toward the door. She looked at him one last time, a lifetime of unspoken love and crushing regret swimming in her dark eyes. "Some flaws, Arvid," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last syllable, "are just too deeply coded to patch." She turned and walked out of the office, disappearing into the chaotic remnants of their dying company, leaving Arvid completely alone in the wreckage. The office of Florio Tosi Innovations had transformed into a tomb. By midnight on Wednesday, the sprawling open-plan floor was pitch black, illuminated only by the sterile, blinking blue lights of the server racks behind their glass enclosure. Arvid Florio sat at his desk, his eyes bloodshot and burning, surrounded by the physical debris of his shattered life, half-empty coffee cups, crumpled printouts of security logs, and the heavy, silver keycard Rosina had left behind. He picked up the keycard, rubbing his thumb over the embossed logo. The metal was cold. Some flaws are just too deeply coded to patch. Her parting words echoed endlessly in his skull, a loop of pure, concentrated regret. He had lost her. The realization was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest until every breath felt like a monumental effort. He had built an empire of logic, entirely failing to recognize that love was the only variable that actually mattered. But Arvid was, at his core, a problem solver. The company was bleeding out, Rosina was gone, and someone had held the knife. He couldn't fix Rosina's broken heart tonight, but he could find the hand that wielded the blade. He turned back to his monitors. Rosina had been right. The system logs indicated Zacharia's terminal had initiated the data transfer, but Zacharia's building access fob showed he had been down the street at a local paninoteca during the exact timestamp of the leak. It was a spoof, a meticulous inside job. Someone had physically sat at Zacharia's desk. Arvid pulled up the internal surveillance network. To his immense frustration, the camera pointing toward the junior developer pod had been remotely disabled for a routine firmware update for precisely 20 minutes on Tuesday evening. The hacker knew the system intimately. "Who has network admin rights besides me, Rosina, and Zaharia?" Arvid muttered to himself, his voice raspy in the silent room. He opened the master directory. The list was short. The three of them and the office manager profile. It was an archaic redundancy set up years ago when they first leased the space, allowing the front desk to reset the router and manage guest Wi-Fi. Arvid's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, the sharp clacking echoing like gunfire. He drilled down into the office manager activity logs. Lena Foliero. Quiet, unassuming Lena, who always smelled faintly of lavender and complained about the espresso machine. The primary logs were wiped clean. Whoever did this was thorough, but they weren't Rosina Tosi, and they didn't know the intricate, hidden backdoor architectures Rosina had built into the physical server drives. Arvid bypassed the user interface entirely, accessing the raw, uncompiled data streams from the router's physical memory cache. There it was, a tiny, almost invisible discrepancy. At 6:42 p.m. on Tuesday, the office manager credentials had bypassed the standard firewall to access Zacharia's local IP, utilizing a generic, untraceable VPN. But the VPN had dropped for a fraction of a millisecond, a microscopic glitch. In that fraction of a second, the router had logged the destination IP of a massive data packet. Arvid ran a trace. It bounced through 3 proxy servers in Eastern Europe before terminating at a private, encrypted cloud server hosted in Geneva. The registered owner of the parent company? Mitchell Analytics. Nixon Mitchell. Arvid slammed his fist onto the desk, the impact rattling the glass walls of his office. Lena Foliero had sold them out to their biggest rival. Nixon had bought the data, found the flaw, and anonymously hand-delivered it to Naud Munier to tank their valuation, paving the way for Nixon to swoop in and acquire the ashes of Florio Tosi for pennies. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through Arvid's veins, but rage wasn't a strategy. He needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof that would stand up in front of Jane Meyer's legal scrutiny, and he couldn't get it alone. Arvid grabbed his coat and sprinted out of the building into the damp, freezing Milan night. He drove his car like a madman through the slick, rain-washed streets, pulling up outside a dingy apartment complex in the University District. He ran up 3 flights of concrete stairs and pounded on a dented metal door. A minute later, Zaharia pulled the door open. He was wearing sweatpants, his hair sticking up in wild directions, a video game controller in one hand. His eyes narrowed instantly. "What the hell do you want, Arvid? I don't work for you anymore." "I know who framed you," Arvid said, breathing heavily. "I know who leaked the data. It was Lena. She sold it to Nixon Mitchell." Zaharia froze, the anger on his face morphing into stunned disbelief. "Lena? The plant lady?" "She has legacy admin access. She spoofed your terminal. I have the raw router logs, Zaharia, but they are circumstantial. I need to prove the financial link, or at least catch her in the act of communicating with Nixon. I need your help." Zaharia crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Why should I help you? You accused me of corporate treason. You and Rosina are a nightmare to be around. You burned my reputation. I will clear your name publicly. I will give you a 20% raise, a senior developer title, and a public apology in front of the entire industry," Arvid promised, his voice desperate. "Zaharia, please. Nixon is going to destroy everything we built. He's going to destroy Rosina's legacy." At the mention of Rosina, Zaharia's jaw clenched. Despite the chaos, he respected the brilliant architect immensely. He looked at Arvid, seeing not the arrogant CEO, but a broken, desperate man fighting for his life. Zaharia sighed heavily and stepped back, gesturing into the messy apartment. "Get in. But if you yell at me once, I'm hacking your personal bank account and buying a Tesla." Thursday morning dawned crisp and bitterly cold. The atmosphere inside the Florio Tosi office was funereal. Only a handful of employees had shown up, milling about aimlessly, waiting for the official email announcing the company's insolvency. Lena Foliero sat at her reception desk sipping a chamomile tea. She wore a calm, serene expression, though internally she was buzzing with anticipation. Nixon had texted her earlier, "Munier deal is dead, preparing the acquisition paperwork. Your corner office is waiting." At 9 a.m. sharp, Arvid walked through the glass doors. He looked terrible. Pale, unshaven, his suit slightly wrinkled, but there was a dangerous, predatory calm in his eyes. Behind him walked Zaharia, carrying a heavy gaming laptop. The office went dead silent. Lena sat up slightly straighter, a flicker of unease crossing her features. "Good morning, Lena," Arvid said loudly, his voice carrying across the entire floor. "Good morning, Mr. Florio. Zaharia." "I thought you resigned," Lena asked, her voice perfectly modulated to feign polite confusion. "Change of plans," Arvid said tightly. He walked past her desk and into the glass office, leaving the door wide open. Zaharia sat at his old terminal, opening his laptop and rapidly typing commands. Inside his office, Arvid opened his laptop and dialed a secure video conference link. The screen flickered, and the stern, unyielding faces of Nerd Munier and Jane Meyer appeared. "You begged for exactly 5 minutes, Mr. Florio," Naud said, his voice cold enough to freeze nitrogen. "This had better not be another attempt to explain away your failing code." "It's not, Naud. It's an explanation of how Nixon Mitchell committed corporate espionage to steal your investment," Arvid stated firmly. Jane Meyer leaned forward, instantly alert. "Those are heavy accusations, Arvid. You need proof." "Watch," Arvid said. Out on the floor, Zaharia executed a script. He uploaded a file to the restricted master server. The file was labeled Q4_dynamic_load_patch_final.nc. It was a dummy file, a honeypot entirely fabricated by Zaharia over the last 6 hours, filled with garbage code but heavily encrypted to look incredibly valuable. Arvid watched Lena through the glass walls of his office. He saw the notification pop up on her secondary monitor. He saw her eyes widen. She looked around the office. Everyone was whispering, distracted by Arvid and Zaharia's sudden return. Lena's fingers moved to her keyboard. "Zaharia, talk to me," Arvid said softly into his headset, broadcasting to Node and Jane. "Target has taken the bait," Zaharia's voice crackled over the line. "She's accessing the file, bypassing standard protocols using her legacy admin key." On the video call, Jane's eyes widened as Zaharia shared his screen, displaying a live trace route. "She's copying it to a burner drive," Zaharia narrated, his fingers flying. "And she's opening an encrypted email client, attaching the file. Destination address, n.mitchell@mitchellanalytics.ch. Stop her, Naud commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, the reality of the sabotage dawning on him. Let her send it, Jane corrected, a vicious smile playing on her lips. The moment it hits Nixon's server, he is in possession of stolen intellectual property. It's a federal crime. Arvid watched Lena hit the enter key. The file was sent. Arvid stood up. He walked out of his office, his footsteps heavy and echoing in the silent room. He stopped directly in front of Lena's desk. She looked up, her calm facade firmly in place. Can I help you, Arvid? She asked. You're fired, Lena, Arvid said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute terrifying finality. Lena blinked, a nervous laugh escaping her throat. I'm sorry? On what grounds? On the grounds of corporate espionage, data theft, and breach of fiduciary duty, Arvid said, turning his laptop screen around so she could see the live video feed of Naud Mounier and Jane Meyer, along with the undeniable trace of her email to Nixon. Lena's face drained of all colour, the serene mask shattered, replaced by stark, undisguised terror. She looked at the screen, then at Arvid, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The authorities have already been dispatched to Mitchell Analytics, Jane Meyer's voice cut through the silence via the laptop speakers. And I suggest you remain precisely where you are, Ms. Foliero. The local polizia are on their way to your location as well. Lena slumped back in her chair, burying her face in her trembling hands. The office erupted into shocked, chaotic whispers. Arvid walked back into his office, picking up his headset. The flaw in our data was real, Naud. We admit that. But it was an alpha test, violently ripped out of context by a rival who knew he couldn't beat us in the open market. Zaharia and Rosina have already modelled a theoretical patch. Naud remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. He steepled his fingers, staring at Arvid through the webcam. I detest being manipulated, Naud finally growled. Nixon Mitchell has made a very powerful enemy today. Naud sighed, the tension in his shoulders relaxing by a fraction. Clean your house, Arvid. Fortify your security. If you can provide the verified patch for the load balancing issue by Monday, the €5 million offer is back on the table, under strict probationary oversight. Thank you, Naud, Arvid said, his voice thick with relief. You won't regret this. The call disconnected. Arvid closed the laptop. They had won. The company was saved. Zaharia was standing in the doorway, a triumphant grin on his face. The employees were cheering. It was the greatest victory of Arvid's professional life, and it meant absolutely nothing. Because as Arvid looked out at the celebrating office, the only thing he saw was the empty space beside him, the space where Rosina should have been standing. Arvid grabbed his coat. He threw his master keys to Zaharia. You're in charge. Give everyone a bonus. I have to go. Where are you going? Zaharia called out. To fix the unpatchable, Arvid yelled over his shoulder, already sprinting for the door. The storm had finally broken, leaving Milan bathed in the golden bruised light of late afternoon. Arvid searched everywhere. He went to her apartment. No answer. He checked her favourite secluded corner of the Sempione Park. Empty. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his throat. What if she had left the city? What if she was already on a train to Rome, leaving him behind forever? Then, he remembered. Before the venture capital, before the stress tests and the massive office, there was a tiny cramped apartment near the Navigli canals. When they were broke and building the foundation of their software, they used to walk down to a specific crumbling stone bridge over the water, drinking cheap wine and dreaming of changing the world. It was her sanctuary. Arvid abandoned his car in a loading zone and ran. He pushed past tourists and locals enjoying the post-rain evening, his lungs burning, his eyes desperately scanning the bridges. He found her on the Ponte Alda Marini. She was standing alone, leaning against the wrought iron railing, staring down at the dark, reflective water. She wore a heavy trench coat, her dark hair blowing freely in the cold wind, free of its severe knot. She looked incredibly small and profoundly sad. Arvid slowed to a walk, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from the running but from the terrifying magnitude of what he was about to do. I always hated that you liked this bridge, Arvid said, his voice breathless as he stepped up beside her. It's damp, it's drafty, and the structural integrity is highly questionable. Rosina flinched, gripping the railing tighter. She didn't turn to look at him. Go away, Arvid. I sent the resignation paperwork to legal an hour ago. I tore it up, Arvid replied simply. He leaned against the railing next to her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her shoulder. Lena Foliero is in police custody. She sold our beta data to Nixon Mitchell. He sent it to Naud to tank the deal. Rosina's head whipped around, her eyes wide with shock. Lena! Our Lena! How? It's a long story involving IP spoofing and Zaharia being a chaotic genius, Arvid smiled softly. Naud reinstated the offer. He hates Nixon more than he hates flawed alpha code. The company is safe, Rosina. We won. Rosina stared at him, the wind whipping a strand of hair across her face. Slowly, the relief washed over her, softening the rigid lines of her posture. But it was quickly replaced by a profound, defensive sorrow. I'm glad, she whispered, looking back down at the water. I'm genuinely glad, Arvid. You deserve it. You built an amazing company. We built an amazing company, Arvid corrected firmly. You don't need me anymore. You proved that today. I didn't come here for the chief architect, Rosina, Arvid said, turning his body to face her completely. He reached out, gently hooking a finger under her chin and forcing her to look at him. Her dark eyes were swimming with unshed tears, her defenses completely demolished. I came here, Arvid continued, his voice dropping to a rough, emotional whisper, for the woman who whispered her wish in a crowded restaurant. The woman I have been too stupid, too terrified, and too blind to claim. Rosina's breath hitched. Arvid, don't play with this. If this is another joke, another defense mechanism, I have loved you since the day you yelled at me for misusing a semicolon in our first pitch deck, Arvid interrupted, stepping into her space, entirely obliterating the professional distance they had maintained for 5 years. I built walls because I thought my feelings were a liability. I thought my love would break our partnership. But I was wrong, Rosina. You aren't a variable in my life. You are the entire operating system. A single tear spilled over her lashes, tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. You're serious? Arvid took her face in both of his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tear. I have never been more serious in my life. I don't want to build an empire if I have to sit on the throne alone. I want you. All of you. The brilliant coder, the terrible liar, the woman I want to spend the rest of my life arguing with. Rosina stared into his eyes, searching for any trace of hesitation, any remnant of the lie. She found nothing but raw, absolute devotion. A trembling, watery smile broke across her face, the most beautiful thing Arvid had ever seen. You said I was your wife to Augusto Marin, she whispered, her voice hitching. I lied, Arvid said softly, leaning down until their foreheads rested against each other, sharing the same breath. But I spend every second of every day wishing it were true. Rosina let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She reached up, her hands tangling in the lapels of his coat, and pulled him down. When their lips finally met, it wasn't a tentative exploration. It was a collision of 5 years of repressed desire, a desperate, passionate confirmation of everything they had almost lost. The cold wind, the noisy canals, the venture capital, the betrayals, it all vanished, leaving only the undeniable, unpatchable truth of their love. Arvid wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground, anchoring himself to the only reality that mattered. They had survived the sabotage, but more importantly, they had finally surrendered to each other. The success of Florio Tosi Innovations was ultimately written in lines of code, but the survival of its founders was forged in the fires of vulnerability. Arvid and Rosina learned the hardest lesson of all, that the most complex algorithms in the world mean nothing without the courage to execute the messy, unpredictable logic of the human heart. They had spent years building firewalls to protect their professional ambitions, nearly losing their chance at profound happiness in the process. True partnership isn't about maintaining a flawless facade. It's about standing in the wreckage of your mistakes, looking at the person beside you, and choosing to rebuild together. Some flaws aren't meant to be patched. They are meant to be embraced as the very foundation of who we are. If this story of corporate sabotage, hidden desires, and the ultimate triumph of love kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a dramatic romance, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, emotional stories.